The coffee maker was still on the counter. I'd bought it. My fishing rods were still in the mudroom. My reading glasses, the ones I kept meaning to replace, were still on the end table by the couch. Everything was still there. Everything except me. That's the part that stays with you, not the argument, not the words. Just the image of your own house through the passenger window as you pull away, looking smaller than you remembered. I was 62 years old when my wife told me her son needed to move back in, and that there wasn't room for both of us. I want to be honest about how it happened, because when I tell it straight, some people don't believe me. They think I'm leaving something out. They think a man doesn't just quietly pack a bag and drive away from the house he's lived in for 11 years without putting up a fight. But that's exactly what I did. Her name was Diane. We'd been married 9 years at that point. Second marriage for both of us. I came into it with a paid-off truck, a pension from 30 years with the county water department, and 2 adult daughters who lived in different states and called on birthdays. She came into it with a house she'd inherited from her first husband, a part-time bookkeeping job she did from the spare bedroom, and a son named, well, I'll call him what I always called him, her son. Because that's all he ever let me be to him. A stranger in his mother's house. He was 34 when all of this started. He'd been living out in Tucson for a few years, some kind of tech work, he said. I never fully understood what he did. I just knew that when he called, Diane changed. She'd get up and walk to the other room. She'd come back quieter. She'd make dinner and not say much. I didn't think anything of it at first. Plenty of parents are that way about their grown kids. You love them so hard that when they call you, it rearranges something in your chest. But then the calls got longer, and one Sunday evening in March, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said he was coming back. He needed space, she said. He'd had some trouble. She didn't say what kind, and he needed time to reset. She said this like she was telling me the weather. Matter of fact. Steady. I asked where he was going to stay. She looked at me for a moment. Long enough that I understood before she said anything. He'll need the second bedroom, she said. I pointed out that the second bedroom was where she kept her office, where she did her bookkeeping work. He can use the living room for now, she said, and I can move my desk into our room. I said, okay, that's the word I used. Okay, I should have said more. I know that now. I've had years to practice the conversation I should have had right then at that kitchen table on that Sunday evening. But I said okay, and I went to watch television, and I told myself it would be temporary. He arrived on a Thursday in April. I came home from my standing lunch with a buddy of mine. We met every Thursday at a diner on Route 9, had done it for years, and there was a car I didn't recognize in the driveway, and 2 large duffel bags in the cardboard box sitting in the entryway. He was in the kitchen eating a sandwich Diane had made him. He shook my hand. Firm handshake, at least. He said it was good to see me. I told him same. We both knew we were performing something. The first 2 weeks weren't so bad, he kept to himself. He slept late. He ate whatever was in the refrigerator without asking. He left cups in places. Cups didn't belong. Small things. The kind of things you let go because you're trying. The third week, something shifted. I came home one afternoon to find he'd moved my chair. I had a chair in the living room. Leather, bought it at an estate sale, sat in it every evening to read. I'd had it for 15 years. It was in the corner where I'd always kept it. When I came home that Thursday, it was pushed against the wall, and he was sitting in it, laptop open, headphones on, not even aware I'd come in. I stood there for a moment. I went and said I was going to need my chair back. He looked up. Took one earbud out. Said, "Oh, I didn't think you were using it. I said I use it every evening." He said, "Sorry, man," and didn't move. Diane was in the kitchen. I didn't say anything to her about it. I went and sat at the dining room table and read there instead. But something settled into my stomach that evening. Something I should have listened to. By June it was different. He was on the phone a lot, late at night. I could hear him through the wall. I don't know who he talked to, but the conversations had that low, restless quality, the kind of voice a man uses when he's working something out that isn't working. He started having opinions about things, about what we watched in the evenings, about what Diane cooked, about what time the lights went off. He'd make these comments, not quite complaints, not quite requests, just observations that sat in the room and didn't leave. And Diane listened to them. That was the part I kept catching myself on. Not that he said things, but that she heard them differently than she heard me. She started asking me to keep the TV lower. She started making his preferred meals more often. He didn't eat meat, which wasn't something she'd mentioned when he moved in. She rearranged the pantry without saying anything. Little reorganizations. Little accommodations. I tried to talk to her about it once. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, the good time we used to have, coffee and quiet. I said I felt like things were shifting in the house. I said I wasn't sure how to explain it, but I felt like a guest. She said I was being sensitive. She said her son was going through a hard time and she needed me to be patient. I was patient. I want to be clear about that. I was patient for 4 more months. The conversation happened on a Tuesday in September. I don't know why I remember it was a Tuesday. I just do. The light was a particular kind of flat gray that comes in the fall before the leaves turn. I'd been out to the hardware store. I came back and she was sitting at the kitchen table waiting. He wasn't in the room, but his presence was in the room the way it always was by then. She said she needed to talk to me. She said it wasn't working. Having 3 people in the house. She said there was tension. She used that word, and she thought it would be better if I found somewhere to stay for a while. To give things a chance to settle. I asked her to say that again. She said it the same way. Calm. Practiced. She'd been thinking about this for a while, I realized. This wasn't the beginning of a conversation. This was the end of one she'd been having with herself. I asked if she was asking me to leave my home. She said it was temporary. She said she just needed things to calm down. She said her son was struggling and she couldn't have conflict in the house right now. I said, I'm your husband. She said she knew that. She said she wasn't asking for anything permanent. I sat there for a moment. I don't know what I was waiting for. Some version of her that was going to say she was wrong, she'd made a mistake, she didn't mean it. That version didn't come. I went upstairs. I packed what I needed for a few weeks. I put my medication in the bag, my work clothes, my reading glasses. I left everything else because I genuinely believed this was temporary. He was standing in the hallway when I came down. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He'd won something, and he knew it. I drove to a motel on the edge of town. 62 years old, 29 days from retirement. And I was checking into a motel with a duffel bag and a view of the parking lot. Here's what I did the next morning, because this matters. I called my attorney. First thing, 8:15, and I had a legal pad in front of me taking notes. He explained what I needed to know about marital property and the house and the options I had. Then I drove to our bank and separated my pension deposit routing to a new account I opened that morning. Just mine. Then I drove to the county records office and requested information about the property deed on the house. I want you to understand why I'm telling you this. Because I know what some people think when they hear a story like this. They think the man just sat down and felt sorry for himself. And I did feel sorry for myself. Some nights at that motel I felt lower than I had in years. But I also made decisions, quiet decisions, careful ones. My attorney said I had options. The house was in her name. It had come from her first marriage, and she'd owned it before we met. So that was a harder fight. But the retirement account, the savings we'd accumulated during the marriage, the joint investments, those were different conversations. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I just started making decisions. She called me twice that first week. Asked how I was doing. Said things were calmer at the house. Said she thought the space was helping. I was polite. I asked after her. I said I was fine. I was not fine, but I was functional, and at 62 that sometimes has to be enough. The second week, I called a man I knew from the water department. He'd retired 2 years before me and gone into private consulting, testing, compliance work for smaller municipalities that couldn't afford a full-time department. I asked if there was room for one more. He said he'd been waiting for me to ask. I signed paperwork that week. The divorce, because that's what it became, though it took a few months to get there, was settled quietly. She got the house. I got my share of the joint savings, my retirement, and the truck. I also got a storage unit full of things she'd assumed I'd just leave behind. The leather chair, my grandfather's tools, the good set of cast iron pans I'd brought into the marriage. I rented a small house on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms, covered porch in the back, a yard I could actually manage. I planted tomatoes that first spring out of something that felt half like stubbornness and half like faith. The consulting work was good. I'm not going to pretend it turned into something dramatic. I didn't build an empire, but I was good at what I did, and word moved the way word does in those circles. Within the first year, I had 3 municipal contracts. Within 2, I'd brought in a younger technician to handle the fieldwork while I handled the assessments and reporting. My daughters came to visit that first Christmas, both of them at the same time, which hadn't happened in years. We sat on the covered porch in the cold with blankets and bourbon, and they told me things I didn't know they knew about my marriage, how they'd seen things I hadn't, how they'd been worried. I hadn't known they were watching. A man gets to a certain age, and he thinks he's invisible, that other people are living their lives and not looking at his. But your children are always watching. They see the things you work hard not to show. 4 years in, I got an email. It came through the consulting company's general address, the one on our website, an inquiry from a property management company I didn't recognize, asking about water compliance assessments for a residential property. The address they listed was her house. I don't think she knew it was me. The company name had changed since our marriage. I'd incorporated under my initials and my partner's, and she would have had no reason to connect it. I forwarded it to my partner and asked him to handle the scheduling. He did. He called me afterward and said, "You knew the woman who owns that property?" I said we used to be married. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said she asked a lot of questions about who ran the company. I said I hoped he'd told her. He laughed. He said I hoped he'd told her. He laughed. He said he had. She called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail the first time. I sat with my coffee and listened to the message. Her voice sounded the same, that careful, even quality she had, like she'd already rehearsed what she was going to say. She said she'd had no idea. She said she'd seen the name and thought it might be, well, she said she'd like to talk. I called her back the next evening. It wasn't a long conversation. She asked how I was. I told her I was good, genuinely. She said she'd heard good things about the work. Said a neighbor of hers had recommended us. Then she said, "I think we made some mistakes." "Not I. We?" I listened. I let her finish. I told her I thought she was probably right. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, and this surprised me as I said it, because I wasn't. The anger had burned off somewhere around the 2nd year, replaced by something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, more like distance. The kind that comes when you've built enough of a life that the old wound stops pulling. I wished her well. I meant it. She asked if we could have coffee sometime. I told her I'd think about it. I haven't thought about it much. I'm 67 now. I still have the truck, different truck, but same color, which might say something about me. I still meet my buddy at the diner every Thursday. I still plant tomatoes in the spring, though I've added peppers and one ambitious row of corn that never quite works out the way I planned. The covered porch is my favorite thing. Evenings, I sit out there with whatever I'm reading and let the light go down. It's quiet in a way I didn't used to know how to appreciate. Not lonely quiet. Just space. My daughters call more often now. My oldest came and stayed for a week last summer, and we built a small garden bed in the back together, and when she left, she hugged me longer than usual at the car. And I understood that we'd added something to each other that week. You don't always know what you're getting when you lose something. Sometimes you get years of silence and a duffel bag in a motel parking lot. Sometimes you get a covered porch and a garden and daughters who stay a week. I'll take what I got. I'm keeping it. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that kitchen. Not the words. The words were simple enough. It's the stillness I keep coming back to. The way Diane sat there with her hands folded. The way the decision had already been made before I walked through the door. The way I said, okay, and went upstairs like a man who still believed that being reasonable would eventually be rewarded. It wasn't. But here's the thing I've had to be honest with myself about. The situation didn't start on that Tuesday in September. It started months before, maybe years. In all the small moments, I chose accommodation over clarity. Every time I moved to the dining table and didn't say anything. Every time I let something go, because I was trying. What I called patience, I now understand, was a slow erosion of space, of standing, of the basic expectation that the person you married is also on your side. I don't say this to assign blame. I say it because I think it's true, and because the truth of it cost me something. What I also know is this. The morning after I checked into that motel, I made a phone call. That one call, made before 7 in the morning with bad coffee from a machine in the hallway, changed the next 4 years of my life more than anything else. Not because it was dramatic, because it was a decision. A man alone in a motel room with a legal pad deciding he was going to handle this with his head, not his hurt. There's a version of me that doesn't make that call, that spends the week waiting for her to reconsider, that believes things will go back to how they were if he just gives it enough time. I've met that version of myself before, in my 30s, in my first marriage, in every situation where I confused hoping with doing. That version loses things quietly and doesn't understand why. The version of me that called the attorney, that opened the account, that rang Len 2 days later. That version had to be chosen. It didn't come naturally. It came out of something exhausted and clear, the way a lot of good decisions do. What I built in those 4 years wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't thinking about Diane when I signed those contracts or when my partner and I stayed late going over assessment reports. I was thinking about the work, about doing it well, about whether the tomatoes in the back garden needed more water. That's the thing about building something real. It takes all of you. There's no room left over for scorekeeping. When she said, I think we made some mistakes, she was right. Mistakes were made. But I've also come to understand that what happened had to happen, at least for me, because the life I have now, the covered porch, the Thursday lunches, the week my daughter stayed and we built something together in the backyard, that life wasn't available to me inside that house. I couldn't see it then. I can see it clearly now. A man finds out what he's made of, not when things are good, but when he's 62 years old with one bag in a motel parking lot and nothing decided yet. That moment is a test and also an invitation. You can fold, or you can pick up the phone. I picked up the phone. I'm glad I did.